You're in for a real treat today, and that's because you don't have to listen to me talk for long. What we've put together here today really is like, number one, an announcement that I wish somebody else would have made. It's like the announcement I wish would have always happened. And then we've put together a panel here of like the people I wanted to have a conversation with about affordable housing and the future of affordable housing in the world. And so basically, like, I designed exactly what I wanted, and now now you guys get to enjoy it. So thanks for being here. So Michelle, why don't you come and join me up here on the panel? Michelle is the Dean of the University of Texas Architecture School here in Austin. She was formerly the Hines Chair of Sustainable Architecture Design at Yale University. She taught at Yale and was on the faculty of the Harvard University Graduate School of Design for 10 years. She originally studied mechanical and nuclear engineering, which is dope, and actually worked for several years as an engineer at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Once again, help me welcome Michelle. Bjarke, Maestro, come on up here. So as I said, Bjarke Ingels is the founder and creative director of the Bjarke Ingels Group, one of the most renowned architecture firms on earth. He's likely the most important architect of this generation. I wrote that, he didn't. He laughed. He actually began his career in affordable housing, but he's gone on to design the Google HQ, both in California and the Google HQ in King's Cross, London. He's turned a waste treatment plant into a ski slope. He's built several skyscrapers in Manhattan, redesigned the waterfront in Manhattan to be more resilient to hurricanes. They were recently awarded the Prague Philharmonic. He designed the very playful and mischievous Lego house. And recently, and the reason he's here this week, is he has helped reimagine the rebuilding of El Cosmico with Liz Lambert, which was announced here at South by Southwest. He was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time Magazine, one of the 100 most innovative people by Fast Company, Innovator of the Year by Wall Street Journal. His style has been described variously as eccentric Baroque, pragmatic utopianism, and hedonistic sustainability. Welcome, Bjarke, to the panel with me. And Sarah Satterley, would you come join me up here? Everybody welcome Sarah. Sarah serves as the Director of Architecture and Site Development for Mobile Loaves and Fishes here in Austin in the Community First Village. Every time I walk out to Mobile Loaves and Fishes in the Community First Village, it feels like a miracle. It's like this one little ray of hope in what's otherwise a depressing conversation. They have a 51-acre and growing. They actually just started phase 3, correct? Yeah. Another 51-acre, phase 3 of a permanent supportive housing community for people formerly experiencing chronic homelessness in Austin, Texas. Sarah, in her role, directs the master plan development of the village as it continues to expand, as well as the design and construction of homes and community for people experiencing chronic homelessness. Sarah, thank you for joining us today. Now for the fun part. Sarah, I'm going to start with you. You are on the front lines of this fight, the fight for dignified housing for people who typically have the least of it. And you've kind of seen everything. There was this crazy company one time that wanted to 3D print houses out there that nobody ever heard of. You've seen mobile homes, prefab homes, hempcrete, shotcrete, CMU blocks, stick frame, every philanthropy on earth. What's it take to do what you got? Like, what does it really take to provide the kind of housing that the homeless need that can deliver the kind of successful outcomes that you guys have? And maybe before you do that, tell us a few of the stats as well, like how many homes so far, how many people served. Go ahead.
All right. So thank you for the kind words about Community First. Community First is, like Jason said, a permanent supportive housing community for people that have experienced chronic homelessness. I think today we are home to about 400 residents. And our current property is 51 acres. By the end of this year, it'll be about 550 homes. We are moving in about 10 people a month right now, which is just mind-boggling. And about 85% of the folks that live there are formerly chronically homeless. The average time that somebody has spent on the streets is about 10 years. The average age, I believe, is around 59 years old. And if you're not sure, somebody that in order to qualify as chronically homeless, you have to have been living somewhere not meant for human habitation for at least a year, and have at least one disability. The reality is most of our neighbors have lots and lots of disabilities. And Mobile Loaves has been working with this population for 25 years now, I believe. We started by driving food trucks around the city of Austin, got to know folks. It kind of seemed like the next step from there was, all right, what can we do beyond just giving somebody a sandwich? And so our founder thought, what if we started putting people up in RV parks? And you know, that was like one of the most easily accessible ways to get somebody into immediate shelter. And that ended up being kind of tough because we were removing people from community that they had developed on the streets or in the camps, wherever they were, and plopping them into an unfamiliar environment. So then we thought, why don't we start our own RV park? And so for years, we referred to Community First as an RV park on steroids. I think we've moved a little past that now. We got 3D printed homes out there. We got all types of stuff happening over there. We did start out with mostly refurbished RVs that were donated and that we spent way, way too much time trying to refurbish. And as we all know, RVs don't make great permanent housing. And so we've kind of moved on to some other models. In addition to RVs and what we call park model RVs, which are essentially just manufactured homes, we also have what we call micro homes, and those are site-built homes that are under 200 square feet. They're kind of SRO or dorm style, so they share facilities like bathrooms, kitchens, with groups of other homes. And all of those are designed by architects from all over Austin and are built by local home builders also from all over Austin, many of whom donated for materials and labor to get those homes built. So it's a huge labor of love from all sorts of folks from the architecture and construction world all over Austin. And yes, we have experienced all different types of construction out there. We've used a lot of pre-manufactured products, so RVs, and then of course what we call park model RVs, and those have actually worked really well for us. As a nonprofit, we are also a developer. It's nice to be able to use a product that is a little bit plug and play. It gets built in a factory. Obviously, there's a lot of efficiencies with that. It also creates safer work environments oftentimes for people that are creating those. And I think it also kind of exists in a code gray area as well. So that's something that I would like to see some policy change around in terms of affordable housing. But so that's one type that we've used is these pre-manufactured homes. And then we've used every proprietary building system that there is out there. And my colleagues will laugh because I tend to be the proprietary building system police at the Village now, because you would not believe the number of systems that people email us and say this is going to change the world, right? And that's true for both conventional or building systems for permanent structures, and then also I get an email probably almost every week about a brand new shipping container that we can plop right here and can house 10 homeless people right now. And those tend to not work very well for providing for permanent housing. So please don't email me about shipping containers. But you know, I would say as a nonprofit, it can be tough. I think sometimes to like dive in with organizations that are doing that because you know, we have limited resources. We want to build things that are going to be sustainable for us to operate in the future, and that includes being able to, you know, maintain them with parts that we can easily access with our pretty, you know, small maintenance team. And we have folks living in these homes that can often be sort of harder on their living environments than maybe other types of tenants. I try to be pretty discerning at this point with what we use. I think that allowing folks to build with lots of different systems early on served us very well because we found a lot of like-minded folks, kind of like we were, that were trying to reimagine what building could be. And we wanted to be a place where we were allowing folks to come try that out. It also created a lot of like whimsy, I think, at the Village. And one of the things we say a lot at the Village is we want anybody to be able to come out there and say, I want to live here. Like, this is cool. This is not what I thought it would be. And, you know, that's definitely something that we still want to maintain going forward is the architectural diversity that we've seen so far. But I do think that at this point, we try to be a little bit discerning with systems that we use, and you guys passed the test, so.
Amazing, thank you. So it sounds like permanence, design freedom and whimsy, and like the not just the initial cost, but the long-term sort of operating and support cost of the building. There's some important learnings of y'all's little experiment out there. I just want to say one more time for Community First Village before I ask Bjarke a question. 400 people housed. I happen to know that the homeless population in Austin hovers around 2,000. So for those of you who aren't feeling the maths today, that's like 20%. One organization committed to this 20%. It's really, really amazing. So congratulations. Bjarke, maestro, you have designed some of the most stunning and beautiful buildings on earth. Yeah, either turn that on or shout like a Viking. We love collaborating together, but of course, often when people see your buildings, one of the first things they say is like, oh my gosh, that's going to be expensive. But I happen to know you care a lot about affordable housing. You and the big team got your start on like several like award-winning affordable housing projects. So talk to us. Is it a fool's errand to hope that we can have both beauty and whimsy and affordability, or are these sort of things gonna? Is there some sort of always the high-end stuff's going to be expensive? Is it like sort of talk to me like in the pragmatic utopianism?
Yeah, like some of my Swedish friends, they gave me a T-shirt that says, "If you think good architecture is expensive, then try bad architecture." I think that the point is, and of course, like. It is fun and enjoyable and easier to make, funky, wild, imaginative, difficult things if you have, if you're making some cultural palace. But ultimately, let's say the majority of the city are the places where we live and we work, and where you always have much tighter fitting constraints. And I think in that sense, very often the art and science of architecture is to organize all the practicalities of everyday life in the most poetic way possible, or even to create something extraordinary out of the ordinary. And I think so in that sense it does require a lot of discipline to really sort of understand how buildings are put together. And then to try to, within those constraints, to see whatever wiggle room there is. And like we recently finished a social housing in Copenhagen, where we took the kind of modularity as the starting point. And typically when you make modules, you end up actually doubling. You get the benefits of prefabrication off-site and the efficiencies of that, but then you end up doubling the walls because you put the modules next to each other, and you actually also double the slabs because you have a ceiling and a floor of the module. So we got the idea to basically pull the modules apart, so only build half as many modules as you had rooms, and then put the next module spanning across, and you get an in-between space. And as a positive side effect, that in-between space suddenly gets 3 feet of extra ceiling height. So suddenly you have social affordable housing with where half of the apartment, basically where you the kitchen and the living room, actually has 12-foot ceilings. So it ends up, and then because of the in between, we could then wedge them a little bit, so you can actually end up creating curves because you just gently shift each module. So the bedrooms and the bathrooms are always completely 90 degrees only. But then the kitchen living is always wedged in one direction or the other. So you end up within this space of absurd constraints, actually finding little freedoms. And as a result, the social housing actually looks much more, in a way, luxurious or avant-garde than the market rentals around them. Of course, we were happy to see that people were lining up almost like this kind of Soviet era queue in front of the leasing office when people had to sign up. You have to qualify, it has to do with your disposable income. And now there's a 50-year waiting list to get in. So it just shows that there is definitely a need and a desire for it. But I think it's definitely a harder problem to solve. But there are definitely ways to turn the constraints into opportunities.
Amazing. It reminds me, but I know that you're a very curious sort of polymath kind of person. I want to ask you in a second about what we maybe could learn. Clearly, you're like learning from other industries and things, and like provoking ideas that way. But first, Michelle, an amazing career, both practicing your craft, but also preparing the next generation of architects and practitioners to design this world we all live in together. Tell me, is there a lot of rigor in thinking in academia about affordable housing, and what are we doing to prepare the next generation of architects to like take these problems like quite seriously and not just sort of chase after like the glorious skyscraper? No offense, Bjarke, I love your skyscrapers, but to produce architects who can take these like social issues like very, very seriously.
I mean, I think this is the question for us of the century. If we think about our field, we have a canon that dates back 2,000 years. We have not strayed very far from those origins. We even still teach out of texts that are nearly 2,000 years old. When we think about sea changes in the way that we think about architecture, the way we think about design, and we think about the public environment in the Renaissance, in the 19th century, and then we had sort of a small one when we had the digital turn just at the end of the last century on that. But we have remained throughout all of that fairly wedded to basically a form-based approach, an approach born of patronage. And as a result, we have ended up sort of shrinking our purview over the centuries, and I would say that our purview has, shrunk ever more. And
you mean the purview of architects?
Purview of architecture. If we think about sort of the span of the built environment, we touch very little of that. We might touch in the way that we involved in the signature buildings, but on the whole, we have very little involvement within that. And this is where we need to have perhaps the most significant sea change ever in our 2,000-year history of this profession. Beginning to think of ourselves as stewards of the built environment, not just the ones who are building a signature piece here, a formal piece here. And for us, it's going to change almost every way that we teach about architecture. We've been very wedded as well to sort of precedent. Precedent ends up being a model, and we've been very wedded to form. So those are the two things that have driven very much our pedagogy that we teach within architecture. Beginning to think about how we start to understand societal issues, how we begin to understand different types of issues in terms of water resources, beginning to understand the complexity of poverty, the complexity of how jurisdictional policy systems begin to work. We can't have an impact until we engage with that world. And I think what fascinates me, what makes this a really important time, is that this is where the young generation is. This is where the young generation wants to work. They're pushing us to change. They're pushing us to begin to sort of address these problems writ large and not just sort of like continue in the path of what is this sort of beautiful, perfect building that I can make, but what are these larger problems that we can solve? Amazing.
Sarah, she references the sort of regulatory, permitting, larger sort of societal regime. I know one of the big arguments of Community First Villages, although housing may be a necessary condition for tackling homelessness and affordable housing, it's not sufficient unto itself. And y'all's big argument is community is a big piece, but like, what else do we need to be thinking about in addition to housing to have the world and the exciting future that we all want?
So many things. No, I think that in our 25 years of working with this population, it's become very clear that homelessness exists at this intersection of a lot of failed systems, many layers of trauma, and really kind of at the core of that, we always say, is the profound catastrophic loss of family and support systems. And, often that leads to social exclusion really early on for folks. So maybe there are things that happen to them later in life that were the catalyst to actually making them homeless at some point. But really that probably started much earlier on. And so when you look at, that family is the cause of it, really that's going to be kind of the remedy to it as well. So housing is essential, but we tend to think of housing as a little bit of a means to an end to getting people to be together in a community. And so I think it's kind of cool when you kind of zoom out and look at the village. I love looking at it in Google Maps because it has, in some ways, very similar kind of site planning to like a typical subdivision, but it's like at a third of the scale, sort of, because our units are so small. But when you look at it, so much of the village, of that 51 acres, is that in-between space. It's the space between the units. And that's really where life happens. And, you know, we have shared facilities as well. We have a lot of services on site. We have a lot of gathering spaces. And those are the things that really like knit together, not only the units themselves, but the pattern of life that people are doing together at the village. I think people are really drawn to that. I think it's also very foundational. You know, I think when you look at housing precedents that haven't existed for a while and for whatever reason we don't currently use, you start to see different structures. For example, something that we talk a lot about are kind of these bungalow courts that started appearing at the beginning of the 20th century. So you had, they actually started because groups of families or low-income workers that couldn't find housing in other areas wanted to live in units near family. They wanted to have units to expand into if they kind of outgrew their unit, and so they had a lot of units on the same property. You know, we had SROs. SROs kind of worked similarly in that they
What's
were...
What's SRO stand for?
Single room occupancy. So it's a form of affordable housing. It's a broad term, right? They could be boarding houses. They could be all sorts of things. But oftentimes the thing that they have in common is that the room or the bed is kind of the unit of the housing. It's not a private unit. And so oftentimes there's shared bathrooms, shared kitchens, other things like that. So when you have kind of these like more informal housing structures, and a lot of times, again, they have shared facilities, shared amenities, it can tend to be easier to access for folks. And especially people that don't typically fit into the box of housing today. So for example, SROs were widely used by people with mental health issues that were coming out of prison that might have trouble kind of getting into the pipeline of conventional housing. And, you know, mostly a lot of these housing types went away for policy reasons, and sometimes inadvertently, actually. But we've kind of lost a lot of these housing structures that a lot of maybe unconventional people or people that didn't typically fit into other types of housing were able to access. And now we don't have a lot of communal spaces when it comes to the type of housing that we build.
Something you said right at the beginning there, I mean, hit hard. The catastrophic loss of family as the problem, but then as the solution, like the restoration of community. That hit.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, wow. Bjarke, you are just the most curious architect I've ever met. What are some of your favorite ideas that you see as you're thinking and noodling on this for the future of affordable housing? And we'll just take 3D printing as a given, and then you can say whatever else you want.
Yeah, exactly. I think I think very often, like one of the you know, I love Darwin and Darwin's theory of evolution. I love him so much that I call my son Darwin, and that's because I think one of the points of when you study evolution is that one of the main ingredients of innovation, or let's say breakthroughs or rapid evolution in the biosphere is migration. When something that has evolved in one environment migrates to another environment. You know, famously when the first fish stranded on land, you know, that created a lot of interesting developments in the biosphere.
Thank goodness for that.
And here we are. But similarly, I think in industry, if we look at other industries and you know, for like you know, like very banally, because things are priced differently and made differently. So, for instance, all the guardrails on the balconies in the social housing we did in Copenhagen are construction site fences, because they're very optimized. They're actually quite elegant when you look closer, and they cost a tenth of what something that is made for a typical architecture. So, and we also did a project that I think could be an idea for this competition. It was for like a similar. It was when we started our office 25 years ago. We did a competition for better, cheaper housing, where we found that if you buy greenhouses from greenhouse contractors that make them for agriculture, because they're made for enclosing acres and acres of flower fields or tomato fields. The cost per square foot was around a third than if you would tender the same glass house from a human housing contractor. So we thought like we could actually, and this was for Denmark, so you could actually buy like very inexpensively these rows of greenhouses, and then suddenly what you're building inside can be it's no longer standing outdoor, so it becomes stick-built interior fit-outs, which also is a completely different price than if you have to have a house with the levels of insulation when they're standing outside in the Danish winter. Here we could have a permanent Spanish climate inside the greenhouse. So those kind of tricks where you try to, in a way, look at other fields, other industries, and try to. I know we've been warned against this. I just heard, but I think there is something there, and I think maybe lastly I would say, and as you said, 3D printing is a given, because I think the one thing that 3D printing brings to the table is the powers of technology and productization, because it seems to be almost a law of nature that the things we make many of, like washing machines and televisions, phones for that matter, they become better and better and better at a lower and lower cost. Which is like today you have the richest man on earth and a student, they actually have the same cell phone. You probably even have a lot of people, the 1.2 billion people living in the slums might even have the same cell phone as the richest man on earth. So in that sense, if you can find ways to bring the power of productization and technology to this space, there's something there. And I think the key thing is scale. Ways to achieve scale, and this will be the last point. Somehow today we treat almost every project in a strange way as if it's the first one we're doing and might be the last one. So we the architects start sketching, the developers have like ideas and then but then we have to then like spit out these buildings through the typical supply chain, and we have to tender things, and then because when people price things, they price in risk, and then through that process, by starting as if we're going to do something like original for the first time, we end up, because of the way things are cost and priced, we end up with almost everything looking almost the same, because it has to go through that same funnel, and we waste a lot of time, we do a lot of rounds of value engineering, and we end up with pretty much the same thing. So if you would reverse the process and actually accept that, and so really say, let's try to create a system that we can remain faithful to, then maybe that commitment to knowing that you'll repeat it will allow you to capture some economic benefits that might actually give you certain freedoms to customize the way, to give freedoms on how you make the individual homes within this kind of system, and even how you finish these homes with different facades. So I think actually like really taking upon your shoulders the idea of thinking about architecture in some way as a product line rather than a one-off. And I think it might actually mean that you can create greater creative freedom and greater sort of architectural freedom rather than the other way around.
Amazing. Michelle, something I've heard you say reminded me of something Bjarke just said, which is sort of varied approaches, like greenhouses to create a Spanish climate in Denmark, and sort of being like very sort of flexible and whimsical in the way that we sort of approach these things. As you've studied both the history of the craft and sort of have a broad purview onto the present practice of the craft of architecture globally, do you sort of see us like narrowing in on like the one solution, or is it going to be like much more diverse and contextual than that from your perspective?
It's definitely going to be the latter. Going back to the amazing video that you put together, 1.2 billion people, UN Habitat sort of puts it into numbers that we can start to grasp, that we would have to build 96,000 housing units a day to meet that need. And so when we talk about scaling up, or the ability to scale up, as long as we're thinking about it as a housing unit, we're not going to be within 2 orders of magnitude of that. We don't have the capacity or the capability at any place to sort of build at that type of level. So it's going to force us to sort of start asking different kinds of questions. And there will be questions that will relate to how do we deal with the missing middle where affordability is eroding, right at the lower level. That will be housing units. How do we deal with some of the most strident needs that we see in some of the most disadvantaged parts of the world? It might be through selective shear walls to prevent earthquakes. There's probably a multitude of different types of approaches that we can begin to use, and I think it's really going to be incumbent upon us as we move forward to start to think about this as an incredibly broad array of suites, a pretty broad array of different types of scenarios, of different types of approaches, of some that are very strategic, of some that are quite repeatable within this. And so, we sort of come back to this amazing competition, which is effing amazing, by the way. I mean,
everybody wishes she would have said the word.
Yeah. It would have to be a smaller audience that I know for that, which is amazing, by the way. What I love about it is not that we'll come up with a $99,000 house, is that in asking the question about it, the number of things that will be revealed that we can start to deploy in multiple kinds of ways. And I think if we think about our field, and going back to where you started with stick-built housing, stick-built housing, 200 years old. We've gone from balloon frame to Western platform frame, but we have fundamentally unchanged that. And I think part of the reason that we think in that way is that, housing is intimate. It's our daily experience. It's very difficult for most of us to imagine housing without imagining ourselves within that. We need to take this competition, and we need to take this approach where we step outside of that and sort of completely reimagine how we house, how we serve, and how we build to meet this stunning need that we're dealing with.
Amazing. Last question for each of you. Same question. You've got one wish, and you can use that wish to do one thing to drive affordable housing forward. What do you wish, Sarah?
Bjarke has ideas. I think you should
Bjarke,
go first.
Oh my God! I was feeling I was enjoying.
You get 2 wishes.
Exactly. Was happy thoughts. Yeah, I mean, like sort of, 100,000 sort of very affordable, high precision 3D printers could definitely do a lot of help.
I'll take it. 100,000 3D printers. Michelle?
Oh, come on.
I like that answer. I don't know.
I think that what I find particularly interesting about this approach is that, we have sat, certainly since World War II, between the kind of the binary between site-built, which will be stick-built, and then manufactured housing within that. What 3D printing does for us is it allows us to sort of site-build as if it was manufactured. So it gives us sort of extraordinary flexibility to deal with
I'm giving you your money. Sorry.
to deal with local needs and local conditions. And I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to take it in a different direction. But, one of the things that many of our planners at our school have introduced me to, and by the way, I have to shout out to them, I'm not an expert in affordable housing. It's Elizabeth Mueller, who's on our faculty, who's one of the country's leading experts in affordable housing. So shout out to Liz. But one of the things I've learned from them, that if in architecture we like to think about starting with the essence, the pure idea, and generalizing from that, and that is generally how we approach scale, is from generalization. When you start dealing with people, it goes in the opposite direction. When you start dealing with communities, as you move more and more local, it actually becomes, quite individual, quite contingent, not constituent, but quite contingent, such that if we look at an affordable housing project that might have a lovely green park, such as the project that Bjarke's talking about, for one community, it becomes, its center, its lifeline. For another community, it's a place of danger. Every single community, every single person is going to be responding to certain things in a different way. We've got to start switching, to start thinking about, rather than sort of like generalizing from a single idea, how it is that we can actually work in terms of making it sort of like, I don't want to quite use the word custom, but it's very much, it is what is needed for this person, for this group, for this place, in this location, in this time, right now. I think that's the challenge. And I think that the very idea of site built with 3D printing at least gets us that technology that forces us to start thinking this place, this moment, this person, this now.
Yeah, amazing. We call it the factory comes to you,
Yep.
so to speak, and it's the scalable bespoke.
So that's what I want to see, is our ability to take it to that level.
Amazing.
That's my wish.
Sarah, got that wish
I just
yet?
want to comment. I love thinking about like this idea of mass customization and like hyper locality, with the idea that we could also come at it from like hyper standardization, like you were mentioning, like as a product line. Like how could we marry those two things together? I think would be really interesting to think about. If there's like a dumb white box that we can hyper customize, right? Or something like that, that we can mass produce at a scale that also allows for that flexibility. I think is very interesting.
But like even sort of like one very simple example is and we actually co-founded a company called Neighbor that does a little bit, and that's like almost like learning from the commercial real estate environment, where it's quite normal that you do core and shell, and then the individual commercial tenants, they do the final fit out of their individual floors, right? And when you think about the Soho loft, it was basically sort of sweatshops for manufacturing, but because they have tall ceilings, large windows because daylight was free, so you might as well take advantage of that. Long spans, so you can move large pieces of equipment around, and like somewhat deep floor plates because you want a large continuous floor plate. They have successfully transformed because of all of those freedoms from manufacturing into some of the most desirable homes you can live in many cities. So in a way, if you almost like, but whereas the way we build housing, still somehow you end up like over determining everything. So like almost imagine housing as shelf space that can be completed with mass manufactured, almost like furniture elements that you place on these shelves, so you can actually have extreme levels of freedom within, simply by, in a way, borrowing the commercial real estate model and using it to solve for housing. So I think there's a lot of mechanisms where you can actually sort of, by accepting a systemic or systematic approach, you can harvest great freedom and individuality.
Yeah, I love that. We talk a lot about the village being like a living organism, and our needs as an organization and even our neighbors' housing needs are going to change over time. And so the most sustainable way that we can design is the most flexible way. If we can design like maximum flexibility, lots of layered uses into whatever we're designing from the very beginning, that's going to serve us well in terms of stewarding our built environment and ultimately serve our neighbors really well. That's an interesting idea to think about. To answer your previous question, I think that I would like to see And I think this kind of happens at a policy scale, but I would like to see more mechanisms for creating different types of housing that is flexible for different family arrangements, and that you can have different types of people living together in sharing space together. And I feel like most housing doesn't really allow for that right now, to kind of move into like a familial unit at sort of this scale of family that's outside of, your typical nuclear family, but not at the scale of, 500 residents in a building somewhere. So I would love to see like even infill projects allow for, policy changes that would allow for, 10 to 15 units be built on 1 or 2 lots. I feel like we would see obviously different architecture, but I think we would see different types of communities develop out of that.
Amazing. May your wishes come true. Ladies and gentlemen, thank God for these folks. Will you give them a round of applause? Thank you all for your valuable time. The line about the richest man on earth and maybe the poorest phone owner on earth have the same phone. Housing is one of these things that, like, there's a very good chance if you were offered a 100-year-old home in Austin or a home built last year in Austin, there's at least a 50% chance you'd want the 100-year-old home. And that's its own kind of tragedy. The future can be incredible, but we're going to have to make it so. I hope you'll all help us spread the word about I-99 and come join us at the party. That's it.